Morning, everyone. It's good to have so many people online. I hope you can hear me. Everyone is muted at the moment. Just to let you know, we will the presentation from Deon will be about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we'll unmute everyone so that anyone can ask questions. But also you can post any comments in the chat group if you want to as we go. And we can get to some of those questions at the end. But it's great to have you guys here. My name's Jonathan Crisp. I'm one of the directors at BarnOwl, and we host the info sharing sessions every second month. And today we're very honored to have Deon van der Westhuizen with us. Deon is a chartered accountant and a CIA with more than 30 years experience. And specialized in governance, risk, strategy management, performance management, and combined assurance. He designed the risk management framework and the internal audit framework and combined assurance framework for the South African government. And he's recently updated it, 2017. It was a major update. So Deon has a vast experience in frameworks and especially public sector. Recently, Deon has done the framework for the Botswana government via a Commonwealth program, and also designed the risk management framework for companies in the fuel and oil industry. Deon is an international speaker on issues of governance and risk, an extraordinary lecturer at the University of Stellenbosch, a fellow IIA, a fellow of the Huguenot College, and a director of Next Step Academy, which is an educational institution under the Graviton Group. Deon's focus at the moment is artificial intelligence, big data and automation, as well as cybersecurity, disaster recovery, and business continuity within the risk management space. But yeah, it's really nice. Good to have Deon here. As I say, it's wonderful to have such a vast, someone with such vast experience that's seen the practical side as well as understands the theoretical side of the COSO framework, the ISO 31000 framework, the National Treasury framework. So we're really looking forward to your presentation, Deon. And I'm going to hand it over to you. And thank you everyone for being here. We are recording the session. We're also going to do a write-up afterwards. You will have access to the slides. Deon's got a great slide pack. So yeah, over to you, Deon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jonathan. It is really nice for the invite, and I recognize a lot of the names on the attendee list. I see Jan Westhuizen there from Hesekwa. I haven't seen him for a while. And Zulile is on there as well. It's really nice seeing everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to run with my slideshow.
Right.
And if somebody can just confirm that you can actually see that.
Yes, we can, Deon.
Okay, thank you. So I think today the challenge with risk management, and yes, I'm working a lot in the in the local government space, but it's been suddenly there's an explosion of risk management or a need for risk management in the private sector space as well. Of course, the banks and the industry, in the insurance industry, they've been leading the pack for many years now, but it's almost like everybody else is picking up on the importance of risk management. But I also see a danger. When I did the review for the Botswana government, I clearly realized one thing, and that is that senior management is understanding that risk management is important, but they just don't buy into it. They just don't spend the time. There's no commitment from there's no tone at the top. There's no commitment from the top. And the end result is a once-a-year risk assessment, which if you follow people like Tim Leach and you follow people like Rainer Lenz, they will tell you if you do that type of risk assessment, a once-a-year risk assessment, you can stop it today. It has absolutely no value. For a while, I sort of, risk management was on my back burner. It was not on the front edge of what I'm trying to do in my business. But then COVID came, and COVID disrupted. And COVID is just a, it's a virus, but it disrupted supply chain. It disrupted the way we communicate. It disrupted the way we work. It disrupted travel and turnover and profit and bottom line and asset management and the value of assets as people are leaving their office space and they are working from home. So just a simple little thing like COVID had an incremental effect on business. And then, of course, just after we passed the COVID challenge, then the Russian-Ukrainian war came around. And suddenly there's an explosion of risks, of which just one of them is the fuel price. But there's an explosion of risks in terms of all sorts of other things. So I want to share with you today what I believe we should be doing in risk management. And 40 minutes is not a lot of time, but let's see what I can do. I've got a structure of the session. There's 9 little things that I want to cover, some of them in more detail than others, and the slideshow will be available to you. I know we all know why we need risk management, but I just want to quickly cover some key words. There's 6 bullet points there, and let's just look at them. The first one is that risk management should create and protect strategic value to all stakeholders. I think that's a big change that COSO is bringing to the table. Risk management is informing strategy. That is what the Tim Leaches of today is preaching. It is not telling you what can go wrong. Risk management is redesigning strategy. And therefore, it's also redesigning value for all the stakeholders. And whether those stakeholders are shareholders in the private sector, or whether you are believing in people, profit, and planet, the King 4 type of principles, or whether you believe as a local government, for example, that your stakeholders are the community, free basic services, giving people, access to services and so forth, we need to get value to all stakeholders. Number 2, it's an integral part of all organizational processes. That means every single process, whether it's supply chain, asset management, investment management, optimizing your cost of capital, infrastructure development, risk management should inform all those processes, and you should build it as part of those processes. Risk management should inform decisions. Many years ago, Virginia Peterson, when I implemented risk management in the Western Cape province, Virginia Peterson made a decision. She says the risk manager, even though he's not in a senior position, will sit in every single senior management meeting. And I was fascinated how they started making decisions 20 years ago, and before they made the decision, they said to the risk managers, so what do you see that might go wrong here? What do we need to be giving our attention to? The 4th bullet point is very important, and when we talk to local government, we don't get this. You see, in local government, we only think that risk management is about the things that can go wrong, and that's the word uncertainty. But in local government, it's all about opportunity. The fact that Eskom is not giving us electricity is creating a massive opportunity. Jan Westhuizen would tell you in Hesekwa is that where they are struggling with water, they've got a desalination plant. So drought turned into an opportunity of desalination. It's a systematic process, I believe in that, and there should be continuous improvement. If we look at governance and risk management, I don't have time to look at this whole risk agenda. And when you look at the slides, go and visit all the bullet points. But there are mainly 4 things that you and I need to do to turn risk into results. Now remember, results is creating value. First of all, we need to look at the risk strategy. And how do we deal with the risks? And how do we assess risks? And who's providing oversight on risk and control? And the big words around risk management today is transparency and accountability. Now, what is interesting is yesterday I presented a course on stakeholder consultation to local government. And the big words in stakeholder consultation or stakeholder participation is transparency and accountability. This slide is coming from an Ernst & Young presentation, where they made a presentation to the private sector. And they talk exactly about the same issues, is that risk strategy should open up, should bring transparency, and should keep people accountable. With the inherent nature of fraud that is now vested, it's part of our systemic nature of our businesses, I think that is important. Embedding risk management, I only want to say 2 things there. If you want to embed risk management, I've learned in Botswana that it's not about implementing risk management. It's about a change management process to get everybody to believe that risk management is important. When the gentleman who's a change management specialist said to me in one of the participation meetings, he says, Deon, the previous team, I was there to review the effectiveness at the end of 5 years. He said to me, you will not find that the risk management is making a difference in Botswana. I said, why not? He says, you know what? We only spoke to the risk managers. The first line of defense, the board of directors, the cabinet, is what, from our side, risk management is just something that you need to do there at the bottom. It's not informing any of our decisions. And therefore, his conclusion was, you need a change management process where you convince people of the value that risk management will bring. The last bullet point under embedded risk management is the fact that you need to align your KPIs and your key risk indicators and your key control indicators. Now, I'm just going to talk about KPIs and KRIs. What I want you to see, it's the same coin, but it's two different sides. On the one side of the coin, it's the key performance indicators. On the other side is the key risk indicators. And we must be careful that the key performance indicator is not number of houses built, and that the key risk indicator is number of houses not built, because that brings no value. We need to find out what the root causes of failure, and we need to convert that into key risk indicators. Of course, we need to improve controls on the left-hand bottom side, and we need to also optimize the risk management functions. When we look at the COSO model, most of you will already know the COSO model very well. Those of you that have listened to me before, I'm a big COSO fan. Is there a place for ISO 31000? I believe there is. I believe ISO 31000 is a little bit more practical, but let's not forget the King Report. When the King Report started talking about the 16 principles for public sector and the 17 for private sector, when the King Report started talking about ethical and transparent leadership, it's funny how those words have actually flowed into COSO. And initially, I think COSO was informing King. I've been privileged that I've been the pre-speaker to Mervyn King now on 7 occasions on the international governance circuit. And that is an amazing man. He's 82 or 84 years old, sharp as you can get, still doing public speaking all over the world. And before COVID, really traveling extensively. And it's fascinating to see that he thinks that risk management and internal audit are absolutely key governance elements. And if we talk to local government and we talk to management outside the banking and the insurance industry, we often find that, internal audit is somewhere down there. I've started a website on just publishing all the vacancies on internal audit. And I've suddenly seen that all the big companies in the world are now looking for internal auditors. Government are strengthening their internal auditors. And what they look for is experienced people, not 25, 23-year-old internal auditors anymore. People with 30 years and so forth experience. So there is a movement. There are 20 principles under 5 components. We don't have time to cover all of them, but I want to illustrate some of them. Of course, there must be governance and culture on the left-hand side. That is important. And I'll talk a little bit about culture and core values and competent individuals. All those sort of things are very similar to the COSO previous model of 2013. But let's just focus on the second column. Strategy, objective setting. Bullet point number 6, analyze the business context. And if you read more, what you will see is, what are you all about? What is your business about? What are your business drivers? What are the value that you create? Why would people use you? What makes you unique? What gives you a space in the market where you are operating? That is just business context. Bullet point number 7 is, now that you know where you fit in, what is your risk appetite? And what is interesting about risk appetite is that when you look at risk from a negative side, things that can go wrong, then the risk appetite says, how many stock items can be stolen? Or what is our risk appetite for petty cash theft? It's a negative thing. We are monitoring the size of something that's going wrong. In the COSO 2017 model, they say, what is your risk appetite that you are willing to take to increase the value for your stakeholders? So there's almost a motivation to take a risk. There's a motivation that you need to apply money and people to your risk. And if you do that, it changes number 8. Because once you understand the risk appetite you are willing to take, your strategies will change. It is such an important, subtle difference. And if you start analyzing it, it's not subtle at all. we have positioned the risk appetite incorrectly. And I'm also guilty. When I did the framework for National Treasury and I created my risk and control matrix, and you have all these risks that you identify and all the controls you link up to those risks, it's only after that that I've got a column that says risk appetite. And then I measure my residual risk against my risk appetite. And of course that is important. But look at the positioning of risk appetite here. It is before you set strategy. And strategy is, of course, your local government, your IDPs, government and so forth, for private sector, your strategic planning and so forth, those big strategies that you're going to do in the next 5 years that will take your business to another level. And it's only then that we start developing business objectives. So it seems to me, and what I've seen and I'll give an example later on, what I've seen is that risk appetite is not calculating the size of the error, or not calculating the willingness or the size of the loss. It is really about determining the quantity of risk I'm willing to take. And that is where opportunity and performance kicks in. The third column is performance, and my talk today is actually about the second and the third column. So look at performance there. It's identification of risk, severity of risk, which is the green, yellow, and red. Prioritize the risks. We look at all the red ones. We implement the risk responses. Under number 13, we all know that the risk responses, are avoid, accept, mitigate, and transfer. But now, if you are willing to take risk, there's a fifth risk response. And I'm talking about the broad ones. And now it is about, how do you optimize the risk? How do you take this risk and make sure that you turn it into cash, into value? And then bullet point number 14 is also a focus that I want to have today. And that is that you cannot do risk assessment effectively if you cannot aggregate risks. A portfolio view of risk is where your board of directors or your municipal council or your provincial government has a view of the key risks, like a dashboard in your car. Is the moment they start the car, the dashboard lights up and it tells you what is green, what is yellow, what is red. And that drives your action that you implement when you start the day. If you design your risk assessments incorrectly, a portfolio view of risk is impossible. At the bottom of the slide, there's a little bit of a summary of these 5 elements. And you can see I like the picture here, because we all talk about integrated risk management, but it's not integrated, the word that it's not a word that is really talking to my mind anymore. It's interwoven. Now, I'm an Afrikaans speaking guy, and maybe interwoven is the wrong word, but if you think about a thick carpet that they make by hand, is all those threads are interwoven. It's not easy to get that carpet, to break it apart and to take the beads or the little ropes and break it apart. It's because it's interwoven. Dit is eintlik vervleg. Dis die woord wat ek soek. And if you look at interwoven, it says that risk management is interwoven into many things. And let's just look at them. It starts with your mission, your core values, and then your strategy development. It informs your business objective formulation, and then it helps you to measure your performance. And it's only then that you get enhanced value. Now, you see, when we do risk assessment, most of us start and say, give me your strategic plan, and then we create the strategic risk assessment. Give me the operational plan, and then we do the operational risks. But if you look at this graphic at the bottom of my slide, you see it's the other way around. Enterprise risk management informs your vision and your values. It informs your strategy. So suddenly, it becomes a driver of value and not a measurement tool of anything that can go wrong. Culture is important, and I need to be very careful about time here, so please read the slides. I'm only highlighting some issues. You see, that little picture that you see on the screen that talks about risk averse, risk neutral, and risk aggressive. That is something that COSA brings to the table that is a little bit new. It's a little bit different. They call it the risk spectrum. You see, inherently, a good municipality is risk averse. What do I mean with that? And I really hope Johan Leibrand will bear with me on this. Johan Leibrand is a very competent municipal manager of Drakensberg municipality. And he's made a big differences there, and I really respect him for all the value. So I'm not talking about him, I'm talking about the way that the municipality is operating. From the date that they advertise a tender, to the time that they allocated takes 9 months. Now, if you have budget for 12 months and it takes you 9 months to give the contract to a supplier, that leaves them 3 months to deliver. Why does it take 9 months? It's because Drakenstein is risk averse. They will tick every single supply chain management box not to get a qualification in the financial statements. And eventually it affects the value and the service delivery and the speed of service delivery that is going out. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing. I'm just showing you the effect. That risk averse is suddenly bringing a lot of new rules and things in place. When I designed the enterprise risk framework in 2001, I brought risk appetite in then. And my meaning with risk appetite, and remember it was approved by Treasury, is that management can actually define the risk appetite to say, you know what, in supply chain management, we are willing to make 3% mistakes. When we look at cash management, we have a zero tolerance towards cash theft. When we look at employing people that are lying about their qualifications, we have a 1% tolerance for risk appetite for mistakes. If you have a risk appetite, what it does is it speeds up the processes. Because now you don't need to tick you still need controls in place, but maybe you don't need to tick every box. And having a little bit of risk appetite that you have defined and approved by the council or approved by the board of directors allows you to make decisions a little bit faster. Because with speed comes risk. It's like your car. If you drive 10 k's an hour, the chance that you will ever die in a car accident must be significantly lower than if you drive 300 kilometers an hour. Speed brings risk. And I think this risk spectrum is important. So for everybody in this audience, what do you take from this slide? I think as an organization, we need to sit down and you need to put yourself on that little bar. And where are you? And if you are risk averse, you will not be the leading municipality. You will not be the leading organization that is automating and doing things online. You will not be digitalizing. Artificial intelligence will not be coming your way because we are all nervous about cybersecurity. But if you are risk aggressive, it changes your strategy. You might look at digitalization and these sort of things. And that brings new controls and a new view on risk appetite. This slide is also important. Remember, it's flowing from a previous one. On the left-hand side, your mission, visions, and core values. But what COSO 2017 is telling us, that when we look at strategy, there are actually 3 angles that you can look at strategy. In the orange angle, we talk about we need to look at risk where we are busy doing things that are not aligned with our strategy. Now, I know the audience is private and public sector. So in the private sector, if your strategy is automation, but all your FICA processes are manual, that might be an example of that. In the public sector, you know, if your processes are that you are keeping on employing human resources, where the rest of the world is automating the delivery of water meter reading services, then what you're going to find is that your cost of service delivery will increase. So we need to look at the strategy. And if the strategy is one of automation, then we need to start looking at the quantity of people that we are employing, as that is, for example, a cost driver that is pushing up the amounts of money that people pay for services. On the other purple angle, so the first one is strategy is not aligning with our vision. The second one is we choose a strategy. And because it's new to us, like, for example, digitalization, it brings significantly more risks. It brings cybersecurity, it brings ISO 27000 risks, it brings POPI risks, and it brings disaster recovery and business continuity. So that's also a new angle that when we set down a new strategy, it will lead to new risks. And that's my point, that you cannot do risk assessments once a year. The pink portion at the bottom is then it says that once you know your strategy and you design your key risk indicators, it needs to align with your key performance indicators. You need to understand when you are performing, and you need to understand what is keeping you from performing. And those 3 elements is driving your business strategy and your objectives and your performance eventually. And of course, what we all want to achieve is enhanced performance. In South Africa, this is so important. With a GDP growth of 1.8%, where the government is pushing up interest rates, which will, I think, curb a little bit of these growth that we are so urgently looking for. With unemployment high, I think we really need to look at this middle part, and we need to find new innovations and so forth that can drive the GDP. Integration, now I like interwoven, but integration, I think we understand that in a local government format. You guys might even think about the word transversal, those type of things. Integration, interwoven, transversal. COSO defines it very importantly. It says it improves decisions because it's embedded into everything that you do. And eventually, if you make better decisions, you will have better performance. I see it in my business every single day. Everybody I'm talking to currently is talking about improved decision making, enhancement of performance, and eventually creating value. You see, when you have integrated risk management and performance management, there's a couple of things that happen. Number one, you anticipate the risks earlier. To define that point, I want you to just remind you about the Ukrainian and the Russian war. I mean, COVID was a surprise on all of us. We all went home for five weeks. I think some of us may have revisited our risk assessments at the time, but we all think, it'll pass, and 5 weeks later we'll be back at work. And I mean, 2 years later, we're getting back to some way of normalcy now. And then the Russian war actually hit us. So I've got a client, and I constructively, because it applies equally to South Africa and equally to Botswana, is the Petroleum Fund in Lesotho, like South Africa and like Botswana, is creating a cash buffer that they call a slush fund. So when oil prices are low, they charge us a little bit more, and then they build the slush fund up. And in petroleum side, it was around about 200 million rand, equal to 200 million rand. And then, of course, when prices go up, you use that slush fund to subsidize the increase in prices, so that for the consumer, petrol prices are moving in a very small band. South Africa uses the same principle, Botswana uses the same principle. You see, but when the war started in Ukraine and the sanctions against the Russians and their oil started taking effect, it was interesting, and let me talk about South Africa now and not about the Petroleum Fund. In South Africa, we are currently sitting with a 14.9 billion rand shortage in the slush fund. That means the government had to spend 14.9 billion rand. And we are now running out of fuel reserves, and we are now buying at today's prices. The same thing happened in Lesotho, and a very similar thing happened in Botswana. The speed, and that's what I want you to get here. Within 4 months, the slush funds were wiped out. In the history, it never happened before. And suddenly, within 4 months, this risk that have materialized, that is way out there in Europe, it doesn't touch us directly, but on an indirect basis, wiped out the slush fund. Which means the fact that we are paying 26 or 8 rand per liter now is a direct result that the current strategy that we have is not working. So that will change a lot of things and ways that we will deal with this in the future. Lesotho's strategy is to now start to stockpile oil. And to do that, it will cost them 9 times the size of their slush fund. Can you see that if you can anticipate risks earlier, you can move quicker, you can reduce the total impact on your business? And here's the word, but it can also improve and lengthen your sustainability. Now, when I use the word sustainability, everybody that's in local government will understand what I'm talking about. We're sitting with 168 municipalities that actually have no right to exist, because they don't have a cash coverage of more than 3 to 9 days, which is really, really important. The second bullet point that we talk about there is opportunities. Let me highlight that. And then the third bullet point, there's new words that you might not know yet. Deviations in performance. So embedded risk management helps you to find deviations in performance quickly and consistently. All of us know the words risk appetite and risk tolerance. Risk tolerance has been redefined in the COSO 2017 model. They don't talk about risk tolerance. They call it now variation in performance. Risk tolerance, variation in performance. Risk tolerance is almost like a negative thing. How much risk can I tolerate? Now they've changed it. These risks that you are talking about, how are they affecting your performance? What are the variations in performance? And the focus is really on achievement and not on limiting. It talks to risk aggressive and those sort of things. Of course, the link to performance, I think I've highlighted that extensively now. We really want to get to improve performance, Once again, you see the tolerance for variations in performance on my slide. And then the last bullet point talks about we need to manage the risks in the context of achieving strategy and business objectives and not as individual risks. I've copied this from the COSO presentation that is on the COSO website. Here, they drive exactly what I'm trying to tell you. And that is that risk assessment is not following strategy. Risk and managing risk is actually informing strategy. It is changing strategy on a regular basis. What does it mean in practice? You see, when you do risk assessment and it flows from your strategic plan and you do it once a year and you manage those risks and you do it effectively, it means that at the end of the year, you will still have the original strategic objectives and the original strategic register. But when you start managing risk on a real-time basis, what will happen to your strategy? You will start changing strategy almost real time. And the speed by which business is changing. I mean, I can't remember when's the last time I saw some of you in person, because the way that I am interacting with people is out of my office. I can't remember the last time that I wore a suit or a tie, because the business has changed. My clients, many of my clients, I've never physically seen before. I might not even know their faces or recognize them. That is how my business has changed. And the speed by which it happened is the one that fascinates me. So therefore, managing risk should drive those strategy and objectives. On this slide, let me just focus on two things. There are key performance indicators, one side of the coin, and that is how we measure performance. And let me say once again, one of my pet hobbies at the moment is to design dashboards and to audit the design of dashboards. We are measuring the wrong things. We keep on measuring outputs. How many students do we train? How many people are MMC competent? How many people are defaulting on their long-term loans? How many people are COVID positive? We keep on measuring outputs. It is time that we understand that strategy is about long-term outcomes. And to measure outcomes, it's a different set of KPIs that we need. Outcomes is where effectiveness kicks in. Outputs is just looking at efficiency. Now, of course, efficiency is important and economy is important. We need to double the services that we provide at half the cost. That's a sentence that I've been quoting many times. But at this point in time, what South Africa needs is outcomes, and therefore your indicators need to be designed that way. And of course, your key risk indicators then needs to look at early warning about things that can prevent you from achieving those outcomes. I'm heavily involved in Stellenbosch with a group of people that believe they can change the economic welfare of our country by radically changing the economic platforms, where they don't want to engage with government because they, number one, fraud and corruption, number two, government is very slow, and so forth. And how they are disrupting this because the local economic development plans that we have is not coming to fruition, is not coming into implementation. But of course, their own strategy is coming with a lot of risks as well. Different strategies and different risks. KPIs, key risk indicators, two sides of the same coin. I like this graph. This graph gives us a little bit of a sense, and you need to go back and really just sort of look at it again and study it a little bit and so forth. It comes from the COSO model. That is the idea. But the blue part is the performance, and you can see it's accelerated performance. Those of you that know the word incremental means it's almost like what do we call it? A compound interest. Compound interest has an element of incremental. And you can see performance is not a straight line. It is actually increasing by a bigger percentage over time. And of course, at the same level, risk then, if you manage it properly, is decreasing on an incremental opposite. So I think that is important, that we understand that those two is actually fitting onto one graph. If your performance is well defined and you measure your KPIs and you define your risk and you control those risks and your strategies are in place, that is the type of thing that you need to see. And to be quite honest, I haven't seen one risk assessment where I can pull this sort of graph from my risk assessment software or from whether you do it on Excel or BarnOwl or ERA or whatever. But this one brings the picture or the message of COSO 2017. It brings it right to your mind as that, you know what, that's the two sides of the coin. KPI, key risk indicator. Look at your risk appetite line, the red line. Risk capacity is, of course, risk appetite is what are we willing to do? Risk capacity, I think in the old days, those of you that know me, I confused risk capacity, I think, with risk tolerance. I thought that risk tolerance would have been the accumulation of risk appetites across processes. But that is actually risk capacity. Now, you don't want to take risk to your capacity, because if something goes wrong, your company fails, or your local government institution fails. So your risk appetite will be lower than your risk capacity. But that difference, the movement between risk appetite and risk capacity, is very important to the board of directors in terms of their oversight. They need to understand what is the space that they have that they can move in. And therefore, it's almost that between the green and the red line, that is your safety barrier, if I can call it that. And then, of course, there's also the risk tolerance. I'll come back to that a little bit later, because risk tolerance here is actually, remember the word, variation in performance. And there you can see the variation in performance. Is if your risks are higher, your performance are lower. If your performance is, and your controls and so forth is very good, then your risks are reducing and it improves your performance and it improves values to stakeholders. This is a slide that you need to spend a little bit of time on. In 45 minutes, not easy to cover that. But what I like about this slide, it teaches you a little bit about KPIs, key control indicators, and key risk indicators, and how you actually define a key risk indicator. Please spend some time on that. So in the big picture, and I've got about 10 minutes left, but in the big picture, what we see is that there's a lot of things that are informing our risk-aware decision-making right in the middle of this. So of course, we've got business context and the risk profiles and all the assumptions. We are making so many assumptions in this modern world. COVID changed our lives. We are assuming people will never go back to the office. People are giving up their office space. We are all investing in fiber. Municipalities are investing in fiber. A lot of assumptions that we are making that are changing behavior. If I look at City of Cape Town and the CBD, I often go there and I visit some coffee shops there. There is simply not volume that justifies people having coffee shops anymore, because everybody is now working from home in the suburbs and so forth. So there's a lot of assumptions we are making at the moment that is influencing decisions, and that is part of risk. And of course, the risk culture and so forth, very good picture to help us to understand. One thing in COSO is, if I may say that, and I know you're going to say to me, Deon, 3 lines of defense is old language. So let me just, I understand there's a 5 lines of assurance model. I understand the 3 lines of defense model that has been replaced by the 3 lines model that the Institute published during COVID. But I've just used this slide because I want to show you, I don't have a similar one for the latest IA framework, but what I want you to see is that the COSO model, when they talk about monitoring activities, they align it to risk management. And the risk management traditionally is a second line of defense, or you might call it a second line of assurance, or whatever your model is. I don't want to debate that now. But if we look at monitoring activities, look at the left-hand side, what it actually means. And that comes from the COSO 2013 model. Now, if you understand 2017 says to you, it's not replacing 2013. So the original 2013 is still there. It's an enhancement. It brings risk appetite and risk performance into play. But if you look at bullet point number 16, it talks about conducts ongoing and separate evaluations. Ongoing, 24/7. It's a robot system. And that's why I have the picture of the robot on the right-hand side. Your risk management needs to have a dashboard that can change color. I had a chat with Jonathan on Tuesday when we sort of talked about the parameters of what I can say.
Deon, you've broken up. Can everyone else hear?
Okay, can you still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Now we
Hello?
can hear you, Deon.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, man. There was something. I just had a quick break here. I don't know why. Sorry about that, Jonathan. So the thing is, so if we look at big data and you want to have an effective risk management process, then what we need to do is we need to find tools that can evaluate big data. And that is where ACL or data mining tools or, all those type of tools, that is where they can serve our purpose, as where those things will kick in and make sure that we have continuous evaluation of risks that can feed our residual risk, that can feed the likelihood of things going wrong, and that can measure against the risk appetite. And it's not a Deon design. It comes from COSO, ongoing monitoring. And then, of course, when we find the root causes, we need to analyze those root causes and manage them. I think risk management policies need to change. We all have risk management policies, and the risk management policies are probably all designed around COSO 2013. If you follow what I'm doing here and you want to change you will need to change your risk management policy as well. On the risk categories, Jonathan, is not about the risk universe here. I think the risk universe is important. We need to understand it. This is a risk universe that I've been using many times before. I think we started designing it. It's an Ernst & Young published document, but we started using this risk universe when we had the contract in the Eastern Cape to redesign risk management for the Department of Health and the Department of Education. And we followed COSO at the time, and I think Ernst & Young built on that. And today when they talk about the risk universe, you can see it's actually really, really quite big. Why is the risk universe important? I think that the challenge, Jonathan specifically, is not lying on the internal risks. The challenge that you and I are facing today are all external. COVID is an external risk. Interest rate increases are external risks. The Russian war is an external risk. This monkey, whatever is going around at the moment, is an external risk. Not being able to travel is an external risk. With Kalula, no longer around, it becomes an external risk that is impacting our business. And that is why I brought Risk Universe onto this specific presentation. When we look at risk, I honestly believe we need to spend a lot of time on those two words that COSO 2017 is driving. New, external, that's one, and the other one is emerging. And emerging means we don't even know they are there. There are currently new risks coming forward, and one of them, of course, is artificial intelligence, digitalization, and so forth. If I then go forward, let me skip this slide. Risk on this side at this point in time, I think if you use any of the risk software in South Africa, you're going to produce a risk assessment that looks like the left-hand side. We might have it green, yellow, and red, or green, yellow, orange, and red, and so forth. But what COSO is bringing to the table is there's a second risk assessment. And that second risk assessment that you see on the right-hand side is the risk of not taking your opportunities. The risk of not taking your opportunities. And we need to measure that as well. If you're a municipality and you are not now going into generating your own electricity, that is an opportunity lost. Every municipality that are now setting themselves up to generate electricity will be able to provide their businesses with ongoing access to power so that they can keep on trading. And that is an important opportunity to take. More businesses will come to your town if you can provide that type of service. And more businesses brings more cash flow. It reduces your risk on credit control. It provides you with cash to fund free basic services and so forth on a municipal level, for example. On the risk assessment process, and I'm aware that I'm running short of time. On the risk assessment process, please go through these slides, but three things that I need to cover in this. The first thing is we also need to have a process universe. Now, the process universe, when I say this, I think a lot of people are saying, Deon, are you talking to the converted? But I've been privileged during COVID to work with 4 municipalities where I looked at their risk assessments, and then I have tried to aggregate their risks to a portfolio view of risk. And you know what's happening? It's not possible. Because we don't follow a logical layout of process design before we populate our risk assessment software. We populate risks haphazardly. We choose them, we don't group them, we don't structure them. And there's a document that is called GTAG 8. So GTAG 8 is all about ICT systems, but on a very short basis, it provides us with a methodology that it says, you know what, your process design is like an organogram design. There's a mega process, like for example, procure to pay, which you can break down into major processes on the left-hand column, procurement, receiving, and accounts payable, and that you can then break down into minor or sub-processes. So let's just look at procurement. So requisitioning is a sub-process of procurement, purchase orders is a sub-process of procurement as well. Why do we want to break it down? Number one, if I click on procure to pay, it opens up 3 major processes. Procurement, receiving, and accounts payable. I click on procurement, it opens up 2 processes, requisitions and purchase orders. Why do I want to do it that way? You see, the driver, the owner, the risk owner of requisitions is different from the risk owner from purchase orders. Purchase orders are generated by supply chain. The requisitions are generated by the user. Goods are received by stores and goods are returned by the user. Vendor management is done by supply chain management. Invoice processing is done by creditors. Payments are done by this, the payment function. So we have different users, and to aggregate risk is you need to break your risks down in a logical format. I want to say, and I'm not sure I'm 100% right, but I think 70% of all the risk assessments I've seen that people are doing does not have the ability to break it down. Now, what do I want to achieve here? You see, you need to drill down. If you drill down, you can go for a mega process and you can click and you can break it down. And eventually we assess risks at the bottom level. And where we assess risks, it informs the risk-based audit plan of internal audit. But there's a second thing what we want to do. To get to the portfolio view of risks, we need to aggregate. We need to look at the risks on the lower level and we need to aggregate it to the next level. And we need to aggregate it to the mega process level. And eventually, we need to aggregate it to combined assurance, to the combined assurance report, to the oversight report of the board and of the council, and to the audit committee report. If we do not do it in a logical way, this is not possible. One of my clients could not do it. We are 16 months down the line, still trying to populate the logical design of process universes. Of course, your risk and control matrix, I think, is important that we utilize that. I'm just putting this up there. I know BarnOwl talks to this. I know ERA talks to this. I know Ignite talks to this type of format. We need to link it to our control objectives. We need to link our risks, specifically to that. We need to link our control activities to our risks and so forth. And I believe we need to do this properly. One thing that you see at the bottom of my slide, in the middle of that bottom portion, you can see the COSO components. I think if you follow COSO, you need to bring some columns in here that specifies your alignment with COSO. If you do not align it with COSO, then you are missing one point. COSO talks about all the components of COSO must be present and functioning before a system can be effective. So therefore, we need to look at the control environment, into risk assessment, into performance, and so forth. Important message that if you only look at the control environment, you have not assessed the other elements of COSO as well. On the risk management strategy, you and I know that those are the 4 options, and normally we apply those 4 options against the risk assessment where we look at the negative side of risk. What can go wrong? And that is one way, and I think we've been applying it this way. But now suddenly, what the Tim Leaches of the world are telling us, there's a second part of risk. And that risk is not taking your opportunities. And therefore, on hindsight, the word that you've just seen that appeared on the screen there is wrong. It's not taking risk. It is actually taking opportunity. I need to fix that on the slide. It is about making sure that you maximize the opportunity. Because if you maximize the opportunities, it will create stakeholder value. Now risk assessment software might not be here yet. It might not look at both sides. Maybe we cannot see both sides of the risk assessment yet, but this is what Tim Leach is preaching. And if you follow him on LinkedIn, you will see that he's consistently taking on ISO 31000, taking on COSO. He's a little bit more lenient towards COSO, and taking on the Institute of Internal Auditors, because all 3 of those bodies are focusing on risk as a negative thing. And he is supporting the performance and the risk appetite and taking of a risk. On the risk appetite and the risk tolerance, I think it's a good slide. I've already covered that risk appetite, is informing strategy. That is one important thing. But then why I included this slide is that at the right-hand bottom side, you can see the blue and the red type of risk assessments. And then that word risk tolerance that you can see in the middle column. Remember that in the previous COSO model, 2013, we still spoke about risk tolerance. Now, 2017 talks about variation and performance. And what variation and performance is, it is actually giving us a line, and normally there are 2 lines. It's almost like a little bit of a space that says, as long as you operate within these 2 barriers, that is okay. But of course, what we want to do is we want to operate at the lower end of those barriers. And that is where a third word is kicking in now, is where we set a risk target. Now, a risk target says, I know things are going wrong. I want to look at controls that I want to put in place to reduce those risks that are going wrong. I want to measure the effectiveness of those controls. I want to look at the cost that I'm spending towards those controls. And over time, I want the value of my risk to reduce. So there is also that word that is talking about today that people say you need to target your risk. Is that important on a high level? I'm not so sure. I think it's more important on a lower level, minor process level, where we target risk within that processes. It needs a longer discussion than now. And then, Chair, Jonathan, I'm closing off with 3 quick slides. The one is, I know there's the 5 lines of assurance. If I annoyed you with my reference to the 3 lines of defense, I apologize. But I think there's a high correlation between the layout. There's the board of directors and the governance and the audit committee that is responsible for oversight on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, they actually call it the governing body and the board and the audit committee, but they've never given them a position. They don't have a line of defense on the left-hand one. So the right-hand model is now talking about the board of directors as an explicit responsibility for oversight. And therefore, they need information that can allow them to provide that oversight. So I like the 5 lines of assurance model, which comes from Tim Leach and those guys. I like that model, but the 3 lines of defense still has, I think, a place. We can redefine them. So therefore, if we want to report, Chair's second last slide, is the fact that we need to measure risk and the effectiveness of controls on 3 levels. On the first line, is the risk owner, does he have a control risk self-assessment? What is his own assessment on his management controls? And what fascinates me is that when I look at risk assessments, the risk owner will say my effectiveness is 70%. But if you ask the first line, how did you get to 70%? They can't tell you. So the 70% at best is their own thumbsuck of how effective they think their processes are. It's simply a percentage that they select and not necessarily a quantification of likelihood and impact. That besides the point, you also need to look at the second line of defense. And the second line of defense, or the second line of assurance, if you want to call it that, that is where we have the dashboard, ongoing monitoring, looking at the key risk indicators, comparing them to the key performance indicators of the first line. And then lastly, this important job that internal audit needs to provide now. Remember, we also need to provide assurance on risk management. And with COSA 2017 and the changes, the positioning of risk appetite, how it informs your performance, your KPIs and your KRIs. And Chair, then the third bullet point that is really, really important, how does it inform your decision making? And for that, you need the portfolio view of risk. I think there's a lot of work that internal auditors can do. It's no longer a process of taking the policy of your organization, your risk management policy, and audit compliance with that. You and I as internal auditors will need to go and audit the adequacy of the design of your risk management model. Risk management is losing the importance. People are starting to ignore risk management because they do not see the value. If you disagree with me, read Tim Leach. When he talks to his clients, he needs to go back and he needs to start the whole process of motivating risk management from the beginning. And his reason for that is that risk management is not involved and integrated into processes and so forth, all the things that I've said. So Chair, therefore, if we have risk reports will need to look at the 3 lines of defense that is contributing to the effectiveness of control. So it's no longer just looking at risk and controls. We now need to look at controls across the 3 lines. I apologize for using the word defense here. If you use assurance, but I think you get the message. If you follow the 5 lines of assurance, the principle is still very key to this. Chair, that's my story.
Thanks, Deon. That was there's lots of food for thought there, and I think you and I will debate quite a few things over. We're going to be, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to think about there, but yeah, risk appetite, risk tolerance, all these terms. I think it can get very technical, but it's a good idea also to make it practical. So. We've got a lot of customers that just getting risk registers together and I did like what you mentioned, if you get level 1 risks, in other words, strategic risks, business risks, process risks, and you link those up correctly, you can get a portfolio of risk at a high level right down to a low level, which gives you that interwoven risk management, which your English was spot on. There's nothing wrong with interwoven. Let's open the floor now for some questions. I realize it's quite late, so let me stop talking. Cheryl, please open the floor. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Deon.
If you have any questions, you are able to unmute.
You can just put your hand up, I think. That's probably the best. And then, Deon, I think you've given people like overload, mental overload.
I think, Jonathan, apologies for that, but I think the big drivers is that people need to go back to the slideshow and really read through it. I think it's a little bit maybe too comprehensive for a 45-minute session. So there's a lot of value in that. But also, my email is on the top. So if you need to check something with me or disagree with me, please do so. I'm learning every day. And it's when you get to the practical application where you really have a sense. I see there's a question. There's hands up there, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think Rion.
Yeah, I fully agree. Well, to a large extent, I fully agree with what was said. Just quite interesting, a question for you, sir. I always have been of the opinion, I'm currently heading quality assurance as well, that quality assurance technically looks down at the processes, and we have just embarked on mapping all our business processes. So I find this quite refreshing. Quality assurance look down the processes. In other words, in a sort of a silo manner, and internal audit should look across these processes, sort of a matrix manner, which is quite interesting, and to ensure that your processes down the line is working right, and your processes across, or you can call it systems across the different divisions, is working well as well. I think sometimes we are flawed in that internal audit. If you look at the using a system, that internal audit actually looks what quality audit is auditing, and they are moving up and down the silos as well. Whereas I would see internal audit actually looking across the different divisions and departments, and actually testing the interfaces between the different divisions and departments. But I'm very excited if this is where risk is going, and we are looking at it in this way. I think there's a lot of advantages coming from this. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation.
Thanks, Rion.
John, can I quickly respond, or do you want to take all the questions?
Go for it. Yeah. Go for it.
Rion, man, there's another presentation that we need to do on what you've just said. I like your point of auditing across, integrated. And one example maybe for the audience. You see, when we audit fraud and corruption in supply chain, what do? We take the payment with all the supporting documentation and we compare it to the contract. But what we should actually be doing is we should be auditing across. We should start at the specifications that were set out, which is in a different silo, then on how the bidding processes worked or the tender processes worked, and that's a different silo. And then eventually how the work was delivered and the performance of that supplier was, and that's another silo. And then eventually when we come to the payment and whether the prices was reasonable and did we pay the right price and not excessive prices and so forth. That is only possible, I think, at the moment, if you do your process universe properly, and then where all the good risk management software guys are walking towards is how do you combine your data mining, those tools that can work with big data, how do you combine them or mobilize them to give you the information across? Very good point. I'm also fascinated by that movement.
Kitty Bonet, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, thank you. You did, Jonathan. So I'm working in the strategy unit, and I've also headed a risk management unit while working the strategy unit. So I just want to check if I understand what was shared here with us today. The normal way of how we're doing things is that we develop the strategy and then we identify risk that will help us achieving the target. So what I'm hearing here today is that you need to first identify the risks, and then you develop strategy based on what you've identified as risks. And because sometimes that is not taken into consideration, like he was saying, we only look at the risk once a year, and after we did that, what we also do is that we monitor, we report on how we are implementing the corrective measures for our risk plans on a quarterly basis. But if we identify a risk that will hamper the achievement of the strategy, we don't go back and amend the strategy. We just continue monitoring that particular risk. So I just needed to check if I understood that. Is that the correct way, or things should be done the other way around? You do the risk and then the strategy. And if he can maybe also share books that we can also go through just to get more information on the subject that was shared today. Thank you very much.
Okay. So Jonathan, it's a 20 years ago when we designed risk management, the first time people asked me what comes first, strategy or risk, and it was very easy, strategy, and risk flows from that. I think what we've learned in 2017 is that it's a circle like a wheel, and that wheel is turning faster and faster and faster. And now there's no definitive first. What Kozo is saying, if I can make it as simple as possible, as Kozo says, that the real things that are killing your business, that are affecting sustainability, are happening and surprising us all the time. And they define them. They talk about new risks, and then they talk about emerging risks. And therefore, an emerging risk will drive new strategy. And one of them is the oil price. Lesotho government needs to find a new strategy because they're going to be out of fuel in the next 2 months. No fuel in Lesotho because simply they don't have any way to fund purchases. The slush fund is wiped out. And the similar in South Africa as well. If we don't find a solution to this, that is going to change. So therefore, that emerging risk, which we already knew about when the Russians started making noise 2 years ago about getting into the Ukraine, and we have failed to put that into a strategy, has now affected sustainability. And please, once again, it affected everybody in Africa. So I'm just utilizing my clients as an example. But even in South Africa, 14.9 billion gone. So I think there are risks that will change strategy, and that I intended to say that today. But then you also need to look, if you have a strategy, of course, there are things that will prevent you from achieving those strategy. And that is the traditional things we look at, like the negative part of the risk assessment. But I think the shift is now going to improving strategy, redesigning strategy, improving performance, testing continuously. And maybe strategy is not a 5-year plan anymore. The wheel is turning too fast for that.
I think what's important is testing continuously. Risk management is not something you do once a year. So it needs to be continually assessed, and how those risks affect your existing strategy, and then what new risks and emerging risks are popping up, and how you're going to have to change your strategy, or even scrap a strategy and start a new strategy. So I think that's where risk management can play a major role. But it needs to be continuous. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions. There's a question. Madeline, go for it.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I see we're over the time, and maybe this is more regarding combined assurance, if I may pose a question here, but it is linked to risk management. May I continue? Yes,
of course. Yeah. We'll carry on, and people can drop off as they choose to, but we're available. So yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this information. It was really insightful. I was just wondering, we are currently I'm from internal audit, so we are currently doing the level 3 assurance. But But it seems like in the first round, or what they currently see as the first round of assurance, is that they identified the risk, evaluated the risk, impact probability, control effectiveness, and then captured certain controls. Then in the level 2 assurance, there was no reports or control reports, and I think I have to go back to COSO just to make them aware of what is really actually have to be done on that level. But that was the level 1 assurance, it seems. Level 2 assurance was actually panel discussions, going to more detail on the risk management, refining the controls, maybe adjust the ratings. And then now actually we have to do the second line assurance. So I think maybe the whole approach is a little bit wrong, because they don't issue any reports, or they don't have any control evaluations, or specifically on every control. Maybe we're just very immature currently, but I find it a little problematic when we are doing assurance on level 3, that everything it was just like discussions and everything. There's no proper documentation. Well, we are currently evaluating the documentation linked to these controls, but maybe we're just immature. Maybe someone can just give us guidance of what they are currently doing with regards to the assurance on the risk management, the combined assurance.
Thanks, Madeline. Deon?
I just want to share here, why is the slideshow not showing now? Let me just share again. If we look at combined assurance, and the reason I use the 3 lines of defense picture on the left-hand side is that it gives us a sense of where these things are lying. So if you look at the first line, which is the risk owners, if I can do it that. Now, whether you call it a defense of assurance, let's just park that one now. But so defense talks about, management putting their own controls in place, left-hand bottom side, and the internal control measures, which you need to assess, I believe, in some sort of control risk self-assessment, and I think COSO supports me on that. So this is not an assessment of whether you are 60% or 70% effective. This is an assessment that is based on and COSO provides you with that control risk self-assessment that you can apply across your processes to see if you have a control environment and whether you've done the risk and whether controls have been designed and do you have a dashboard and are they monitoring controls. But if you look at the second line, and I think this is where and today I've only spoken about the risk management, but the gentleman, Rian, who spoke earlier, he spoke about quality, and quality is just below risk management. So there are more than one second line. It's not only risk management. But I believe risk management is critical as the second line to pick up any deviations, and I'm summarizing high level now, but any deviations from the norm. And how do you and I, before we get to internal audit, how would they pick up deviations? On automated systems, that will throw from detection controls. A detection control is picking up when something does not work to the norm. I know it's a basic definition, but it's something the prevention control failed, and therefore we detect that that specific thing did not take place. So when internal audit then does the job as the third line, I believe what they need to do is they need to go and audit that first line. And what would they find under the control risk self-assessment? They will find their process universe. They will find the flow charts. They will find the control and risk self-assessments, those risk and control matrices that should be prepared by management, not by internal audit. It should be prepared by management and their control risk self-assessments. And we should validate, or we should provide assurance on the design and the effectiveness, the adequacy and the effectiveness. And then we need to go to risk management. And what Rian's point was, is that we need to look, risk management is in the ideal position to also look at risk transversely. Because they have access to all the automated systems, they can pick up duplicate payments from the financial system to the same suppliers from the supplier master file under supply chain management by combining information from 2 different systems. And that can reflect on a dashboard and so forth. But you need data mining and big data for the big data purposes there. So this left-hand picture is very clear on the 3 lines. I know companies are using different layouts and with the latest internal audit model, the second line is almost, reporting or combined with the first line. I think every company has their own little bit of a twist in terms of this thing. It's important that you get the 3 lines sorted out. Combined assurance, and then a last comment on that, Jonathan. The challenge with combined assurance, and I don't want to criticize PwC here because I don't think it was their intention, but the document that they published when combined assurance became the buzzword looked like an Excel spreadsheet. And that Excel spreadsheet had the first line, and then who is the first line? Columns, and then the second line, and who is the second line? And then the internal auditors, and then the external auditors. And then on that document that they published, you could actually provide ticks as who provided assurance on the first line, who provided assurance on the second line, who provided assurance here, and internal audit did not provide assurance. It was almost like a report that looked like a couple of tick boxes, where I believe combined assurance is something else. And I just need to explain that in 2 sentences. If you look at any risk assessment software, and you look at populating the inherent risk and the residual risk and the risk assessment software, the question is, who's supposed to do that first? I think it's the first line, the risk owner. If risk management then does some transversal data mining and they find that they disagree with the residual risk assessment of internal audit, what happens to the residual risk assessment that is currently lying in your risk assessment? Is it changed by risk management? If they show that the residual risk is significantly higher, which is the prevalent risk assessment that will flow through to your reports? Now we add the third line. Internal audit does some audit work and they find that the residual risk is significantly higher than whatever the first and the second line indicated. So how do they influence, and what is the residual risk that you will see on your risk registers, and the residual risk versus your risk appetite that will flow through to your combined assurance report? And I think that it's technically difficult. Because at the moment, if you look at the residual risk, you can add comments by the second line, you can add comments by the third line, you can populate a lot of information, but it only shows you one residual risk. And that residual risk is probably the worst rating by one of the 3 lines. I know it sounds, if I talk about this, it sounds very dear mekaar, but it's, if you start to try to get combined assurance to flow from your risk assessment software, that is where the challenges are really sort of hitting you in the face of how do you change this and how do you make it work and so forth. So I hope it gives you some sort of sense.
And Deon, just a follow up. The problem currently is the risk. Yeah, the whole risk management is risk driven. So we concentrate on the high risk areas first, and where there's low control effectiveness, and that makes it very, very difficult for audit to go and audit the controls because some of them are busy being implemented, and they are lacking of controls. So now the first level don't have self-control assessments. The second level doesn't even really know what to evaluate because they just have these discussions, and usually it's just risk management and compliance that's involved in this area, and they just refine the risk register and the controls, and compliance, yes, they add if there's a compliance risk. And then the audit committee expects of internal audit to give assurance of the risk mitigation and controls that were implemented by management on the high risk levels, where there is not a lot of controls yet that can be evaluated. So I don't think, I hope it's not just a problem from our side, but that's what I experience, and I have consulted with Pricewaterhouse. They actually say that we're not supposed to audit where there's no controls or limited controls, because we must give management the opportunity to implement those controls. And I agree. But currently, from the audit committee side and the combined assurance firm, they expect of internal audit to first focus, according to our internal audit plan, on the high risk areas, go into that areas to give assurance that that controls are currently implemented and working. So there's a bit of a problem from my side in that area.
Sorry, if I could just come in there very quickly and then we'll get to Rion. But you know, the IPPF standards, or the professional practice framework standards, talk about the consulting, the consulting and then the assurance side. So there's always that discussion around, independence and things like that. But in my experience, auditors can get involved in the consulting side and start suggesting, improvements and controls that should be added, or should, they often know the business better than better than almost anyone, at that kind of level. And then the assurance side is when you've got a very mature environment, and then you're giving assurance around the controls that are already in place. So I think, isn't it a combination of consulting and assurance?
Jonathan, perfectly, no problem with that, and you're right. One comment that I just have for that is that we must be careful as internal auditors. If you assume, I'm not talking about the advisory or consultancy leg now, about just signing off on the controls. We need to audit controls for two things. The one is adequacy, and the other one is for effectiveness. So when you look at adequacy, you talk about whether a control was designed and whether it's implemented. And then we don't do sample testing. You can just do one transaction, and that is called a walkthrough test. And what you confirm is that the control is there, it is in place. So the design, you've audited that, and is it in place? That's the walkthrough test, implemented. So I would suggest that if you sit in an environment where there are really weaknesses in controls, and the first line did not design those controls, that you don't go, that your audit objective does not say to evaluate the adequacy and the effectiveness of controls. You change your audit to say to evaluate the adequacy. And then what you will find, there are no controls in place. And then your audit opinion, controls are inadequate. And then you move into consultancy, where you say, we recommend that you need to put the following controls in place. If there's, and I also agree with the point, is if a control is inadequate, there's absolutely no purpose to audit for effectiveness. It's almost like when you go to the client and you ask him, are you doing bank recons? And the client says, no, we are not. And you say, show me. I need to do 3 of them, but we're not doing them. But I really need to do effectiveness. That is the thing. So focus on your adequacy. And please, man, my email address is on, I've spoken at the Institute. I've done their risk-based auditing course more than 700 times. I'm a big driver of, we need to do adequacy audits first. And if you work in local government, anyone in the audience, that is the drive. We've got fraud and corruption because our control systems are inadequate, and we need to fix that first.
Thanks. Rion, go for it. Are you there, Rion? Rion's hands up, but
yeah, I'm here. Sorry, okay. I haven't got a good view of my screen here. So a lot of questions coming out of there, and I'm coming back to the process because I'm quite passionate about process modeling and process redesign and so on. And I think it all comes together for me now. Firstly, I think, and I know it's the IPPC, but should it be for adequacy and effectiveness, or should it be rather be for adequacy and efficacy, which means you also include the efficiency? That's just a question out there. Now I'm going back to that graph that the Deon showed from COSO, which reflects the risk against performance, and which that I love. Now the problem we have in government, and it's just off my top, it's maybe a bit controversial, but I believe we are over-governed in a sense that you've got so many bodies there that is governing us that we are getting heavy on the governance side and low on the operational side. I just hear me, I completely support the fact that the controls is not properly measured and so on, but I think the way we go about measuring the effectiveness of the controls, that's where the problem is lying. It's more of a capability than what it is a capacity problem. Hence, we've got the board, we've got, and I discussed this with Jono before, we've got quality assurance. Then we, on top of that, we've got internal audit. We've got the company secretary. There's just too many governing bodies, and it makes the admin side of the business heavy. Now, going back to the graph, the COSO graph that I'm speaking about, it's clear we can control so much, but if we don't look at the process or the efficiency and effectiveness of that process, we're actually losing the plot because we're governing the organization into, how can I say, ineffectiveness. We're just worried about controls. So I think also I just want to mention maybe we should start a movement or an idea that internal audit should also audit the process. And there should be a process model in place, because then you audit against that process model and you also measure the effectiveness of the process model, and bringing all of that together, that we can actually increase the controls and at the same time improve the efficacy of the process.
Yeah, I like what you say, Rian. Otherwise, it's paralysis by over-analysis, and it's all this just too much. Too focused on worried about making mistakes, and like I like what Rian said. You almost your appetite, but efficacy is like how efficient is this process? It's back to that kind of 80-20 rule. You can spend 80% of your time on 20% of the things that make the most difference.
Yeah, Rian, it's definitely interesting. If you look at the risk-based auditing and your background is auditing, and they ask you to audit adequacy and effectiveness, I'll talk to effectiveness just now. Part of your adequacy standards the wrong word, your criteria, for your adequacy criteria, efficiency is one of them. So a system can be adequate where we have a lot of manual processes and so forth, like water meter reading, for example. Somebody walks from house to house to house and document the quantity of water that you've used, and then they go back and it's captured into a system and they make mistakes and the invoices are wrong and so forth. Or you can have an automated system where your water meter simply sends an SMS to the invoice system. So when you look at design, as you need to look at design, the adequacy of the design includes optimization of resources and efficiency. So it's part of that adequacy element. The effectiveness, the institute use effectiveness, but as a lot of people use compliance. As how many times, if this system is working and I draw a sample and I do 25 transactions, can I expect that all 25 transactions will get exactly the same result from the system? That's the compliance auditing. That's the effectiveness part of that. But you're 100% right in terms of the efficiency. It's part of the standards. It is built in. It's part of adequacy.
Okay. Just sorry if I can just come in here. What's an interesting model now? We work with an international UN agency called ICAO. And the interesting side, they also come and audit us regularly. But the interesting thing they have developed, and maybe this can be used in private companies, they've used what they call the Technical Cooperation Bureau, which is a part of them, but a separate part that operates as a consultancy. So if you are big, maybe like Barlow's or London, one of those guys, it might, and you work with different profit centers, it might work for you to also have a revenue stream where you've got a part of your auditing function as a consultancy to actually assist those new and immature business units to grow up.
Yeah, thanks, Rian. Masa Chaba, sorry, Mr. Chaba.
Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Deon. Mine is not exactly a technical question. I heard Deon reference some process document. I think it was GTAG. I just wanted to find the exact name of the I think it was standards or it was related to the process. 8. Okay.
Yeah, GTAG 8. If you can't find it, if you're not a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors, then you can't find it. I have a copy that I can share with you. That is, you can just email me. My email address is on the first slide.
Okay, thank you so much, Deon. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other hands up at the moment, but it's great that we've had such a great audience, and thank you very much for everyone attending. And I'm not sure if there are any last hands before we close. I don't see any. If any pop up, I'll let you know. But Deon, thank you very much for today, and we'll get a little write-up going and get the slides and the recording, which will be on our website. And as I said, there's also, you can email Cheryl if you'd like us to send it explicitly to you. But because we haven't captured anyone's, it's like as you know, you just go onto a link, so you haven't had to register for this, so we don't have everyone's email address. Popia. So if you want any specific communication, please get hold of Cheryl at barnowl.co.za. And then once we've got we've got Deon's email address, that you're free to email Deon as well. So, Rion, your hand's still up. Did you have another question? Rion? Okay. No answer. Thank you very much, guys. Have a most wonderful day, and we will catch up. We will see you guys again soon.
Thank you, Jono.
Thanks, Deon. Thank you. Great.